Ecclesiastes Chapter 2 and these 26 verses. Let us read them, and then we will come back and kind of look at some thoughts and highlights through this. Ecclesiastes Chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. I said in mine heart, Go to now, I will prove thee with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, It is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? I sought in mine heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting mine heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven all the days of their life. I made me great works, I builded me houses, I planted me vineyards, I made me gardens and orchards, and planted trees in them of all kinds of fruits. I made me pools of water to water therewith, the wood that bringeth forth trees. I got me servants and maidens, and had servants born in my house. Also I had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasures of kings and of the provinces. I gat me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men, as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. So I was great, and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiceth in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all the works of my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. And I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which hath already been done? Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. Then said I in my heart, As it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever. Seeing that which now is, in the days to come shall be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man? As the fool. Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool, yet shall he have rule over all my labor wherein I have labored, and wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun. This is also vanity. Therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair of all the labor which I took under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is in wisdom and in knowledge and in equity, yet to a man that hath not labored therein shall he leave it for his portion. For this also is vanity and a great evil. For what hath man of all his labor, and of the vexation of his heart, wherein he hath labored under the sun? For all his days are sorrows, and his travail grief. Yea, his heart taketh not rest in the night. This is also vanity. There is nothing better for man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul to enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he giveth travail, to gather and to heap up, that he may give it to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. So Solomon here describes how he set his mind and heart to explore all the activities and endeavors of men to discover the good or profit in them under the sun. Notice chapter 1, verse 13. He says, and I gave my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. So he said, I'm going to try and see all these things. Verse 1, chapter 2, said, I said in mine heart. I remember how some people, one guy said, well, I said unto myself, self? That's kind of what Solomon is saying here. So I said in mine heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth. And this verb, I will prove thee, I will prove, as the idea of testing the quality of someone or something through a demonstration of stress. As the idea to put to the test, to see the quality of it by putting it under stress. He says, therefore, enjoy pleasure. And the word there, to enjoy, means to see intellectually, to perceive, to experience, to ascertain, to verify. And so the idea here, he says, I'm going to try these things out. And I'm going to see. And the idea was to determine, is in all the labor that man does, in all of his endeavors and all the things that man can do, is there any joy in it? Is there any profit in it under the sun? There is in this, as we go through here, a great example and lesson for all of us. And we can see from Solomon, and Solomon here is speaking under the inspiration of God at the end of his days, as he looks back over his life, and he's honestly, spiritually looking at everything he's done, and what profit is there in all our labor under the sun? And that's what he said. He said, I said to myself, I said to my heart, I said, I'm going to prove you. I'm going to test these things. I'm going to try these things out, put them to the test. And he said, therefore, enjoy pleasure. That is, experience it. And he says, and behold, this also is vanity. Now, it would seem that Solomon, being blessed of God with wisdom and being promised wisdom, set out to gather and to seek out all kinds and forms of the wisdom of men. But after a time, the mere pursuit of wisdom became a vexation of spirit, grief, and the source of much sorrow. And we see this in the latter part of chapter 1 there. It says, I gave my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is vexation of spirit. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. Wisdom is something that needs to be used. I think this is kind of the lesson we see here. It's not just something to be collected. it's needful to apply to the daily walk and exercise of life, not collecting dust on a shelf. There is no satisfaction or sense of fulfillment or accomplishment in just learning facts or collecting proverbs of wisdom. It needs to be applied. Solomon was given wisdom, and as we see from the book of Proverbs and the words of Lemuel and the other there in King Lemuel and words of Agur, the son of Jacob, and these that Solomon collected, Proverbs, these wise sayings, and the sayings of men that expressed this wisdom and all. But that in and of itself, as some people pursue knowledge, they pursue wisdom, and they study. And there's the scripture talks about ever studying but never coming to a knowledge of the truth. Ever learning. Ever learning but never coming to a knowledge of the truth. We've met people that seemed like they were professional students. That's all they wanted to do was stay in college. They were comfortable there. They were comfortable learning. But they didn't get out in the world. They didn't apply all this learning so much as they just kept learning, kept learning, kept learning. And Solomon looks at this and says, it's vain. It's empty. There's no profit in getting knowledge and wisdom in and of itself. But that wisdom, that knowledge has to be put into practice for it to mean something. Solomon then, having the time, the means, the power, and the wealth, he says here in chapter 2, set out by wisdom to find out what, if any profit there was to be discovered in any and all the activities and pursuits of man, beginning with pleasure. Verse 1, he said, I'll prove thee with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. Like wisdom, pleasure for pleasure's sake is empty, and of itself may become, as he says here, vexation of the spirit. Those things, and you see this sometimes with people, that the things that they do to relax, the things that they think, this is what I do to relax. I enjoy doing this. So you just do it and do it and do it, and after a while, you get bored with it. You get tired of it. It's no longer, say the person likes to go fishing, and so they invest all this money in tackle and fishing poles and a boat and all this, and they go out and they fish, and at first it's kind of exciting, but after a while, they don't have time to go, getting up that early, cleaning your equipment, taking care of, maintaining. It's a lot of work to do something to relax. It takes a lot of work. And I think, this is one of the things that people don't think about. And, it's like the people that towing the boat had to park it here because they hit a chug hole and it bent the axle and you couldn't tow the boat, But that was a vexation of spirit. They were very vexed that evening, And that's just all these things. He said, when you do something just for that sake, he said, it's vain. There's no purpose in it. Verse 3, he mentions wine. He said, I sought mine heart to give myself unto wine. Yet, acquainting my heart with wisdom and to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was the good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven all the days of their life. And so we see verse 3 here, the wine, and give myself to wine, wisdom, and lay hold on folly. You know, he says, is there any profit in that? Verse 4 through 6, the great works, and I made me great works. I builded me houses. I planted me vineyards. You know, and Solomon was known, he built a lot of buildings, a lot of public, you know, like libraries and public buildings and things like that for the benefit of the citizens of Jerusalem. And, you know, he was doing a lot of these things. He built houses, he planted vineyards, he made gardens and orchards, he planted trees in them of all kinds of fruits. He made pools of water to water therewith, the wood that bringeth forth trees. He said, I got me servants and maidens, and servants were born in my house. Also I had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. So he tried the wine, he tried the great works, he had servants, he had possessions. Verse 8, I gathered me also silver and gold and the peculiar treasures of kings and of the provinces. I gat me men singers and women singers, and the delight of the sons of men as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. And so he gathered all these things. I mean, he tried the wines, he tried great works, he had servants, he had possessions, he accumulated treasures, he delved into music, and all these things. And verses 9 and 10, Solomon summarized all this and all he had done. So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. And so, as he points out, we'll see that, you know, he did all this labor, all these things. And he says, and I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor. And this was my portion of all my labor. In other words, he said, the only thing I got out of it was kind of the joy of doing it. In verse 11, then I looked. You know, see, he did all these things, and he enjoyed doing them. But when he really stopped and looked at what he had accomplished, and what did it really amount to? Verse 11. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on all the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of the spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. You know, when we look at the things that we do and compare it to eternity, it doesn't really amount to much. But one of the things he talks about is this ongoing cycle of life. You know, and when we take what we've done here, you know, in this little stretch of time, and I've done all this, but in this ongoing cycle, what does that amount to? Because I haven't really done anything new, because anything I've done has already been done before. And anything that whoever comes after me does has already been done. And so in the overall scheme of the universe, he's saying, what have I accomplished? What profit is there in it? He said, behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit. And I think under the sun, and that's the key, in all these things, there was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no real profit in anything I did under the sun. 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter. And listen to what Paul says here. Because he's talking here about the resurrection. And how some say there is no resurrection of the dead. And so he's attacking that concept that there is no resurrection of the dead. If there's no resurrection, Christ is not raised. And he goes on. So he asks this question in verse 19. Or he makes this statement in verse 19. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 19. If in this life only, that's under the sun. That's what Solomon's talking about here when he says under the sun. Paul says, if in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men most miserable. You know, what good is our faith in God? What good is the sacrifices we make? What benefit, what profit is there in anything that we do under the sun? If it's only what we have in this life, if our hope is in this life, then we're all been most miserable. See, now I think that's what Solomon was coming to realize. That in all this activity, in all these things that he tried, which is that which men try. It's what he observed people doing. This person looks like he's having some fun doing that. I think I'll try that. These people, they've built these great buildings and they feel so satisfied. I think I'll try building great buildings. I think I'll do all these things for the people, for the public good. I'll, try these things for my own pleasure and enjoyment. Whatever it was, he tried it. Because he had the means, he had the opportunity, he had the power, he had the wealth to do these things, and he increased in wealth and all these things. But he said, under the sun, it was all vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun in this life only. And in verses 12 through 19, then he expounds upon the vanity of all our labor under the sun. In verse 12, he says, and I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which has been already done? He said, well, I stepped back and looked at this, and I saw the vanity, and he expounds, but why was this vanity? Because I haven't done anything new, first of all. There's nothing new under the sun. And I've made all these accomplishments, and the person that comes along after me, is he going to take and expand upon that and do even greater? He's not going to do anything that hadn't already been done. Verse 13 through 16, then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. He said, wisdom is better than being foolish. He says, I acknowledge that. It's better to be wise than to be a fool. But you know what? The wise man and the fool both have the same ending. There's one event that happens to both, and that's death. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. Then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart that this also is vanity. He said, being this wise isn't going to make me live any longer. I'm I'm not going to increase my life. I'm not going to live forever in this body, in this life. It's appointed that a man wants to die, and after this is judgment. You know, when you look at it from that perspective, and this was later in Solomon's life, he's getting closer to that point. You know, when you're young and you're just full of energy, and you've got all these ideas, and you just want to set the world right and make your mark on the world and this sort of thing. But when you get older and you look back on it, it puts all that in perspective. You have a different perspective on life and what you've accomplished and what it really means. And this is what Solomon was doing. And he's doing this for us. He's giving us the benefit of his perspective at the end of his life as he looks back over all of his accomplishments and everything and his labors, which are the labors that men seek to do. They seek to find fulfillment in. And he puts it in perspective. He said, you know, what benefit was it that I was wise? When the same thing's going to happen to me that happens to the fool. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever. Because he'd already mentioned that in death, there's no remembrance. Seeing then that which now is and the days to come shall be forgotten. He said that which we're doing today, tomorrow, the days ahead, down the road, it's going to be forgotten. And how died the wise man? He said, as the fool. And so, verse 17 through 19, I think he's expressing this idea. He said, therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. What's he saying? I can't take it with me. I have to leave it behind. Somebody else is going to benefit from it. I can't take it with me. I was telling my wife, one of the CDs we have is Bluegrass Gospel I've been listening to in the car. And there was a song that's along that line, you can't take it with you. And it says, you never saw a U-Haul being pulled by Hearst. And, but that's basically what Solomon's saying here. So all the labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool? Doesn't make any difference. He will have rule over all my labor, wherein I have labored, wherein I have shown myself wise under the sun. This is also vanity. You know, if you're doing things for your own, just for the sake of doing it, it's empty, it's vain. If you do things to have, yet you can't take it with you. If you do things to pass on, yet understand that the person who inherits it may not and probably won't be as wise. See, Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived, so he figured whoever followed him was not going to be as wise as what he was. He knew his children. And so, he said, but it doesn't really make any difference, because they're going to have control over it. And so, you know, you can make all the plans and try to set things up as much as you like. But when you're gone, you have no more control over it. Whoever inherits it, whoever gets it. You know? during Jesus' ministry, there was these two brothers that came to him, or one brother came to him, and they had been fussing and fighting over the inheritance. Their dad had passed away. And he said, now, Jesus, you make him share the inheritance with me. You make my brother share with me. And Jesus said, who made me a ruler over you and a judge over you? You know? He said, beware of covetousness. For a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesses. You know, and I think what Jesus was saying there is what Solomon is seeing here and trying to express, is he realized, my life, don't measure it according to the abundance of the things I've done or that I possess. He said, because I look back at it now and I realize it's all vanity, vexation of spirit, and there's no profit in it. What was it Paul said there in the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, you know, if I have not love, though I do all these things, it profiteth me nothing. You can't take it with you, seems to be Solomon's thought here. All you have done, all you have accomplished, all you have accumulated will be left behind and will be possessed by someone else. And who knows, that which was created in labor of wisdom may fall into the hands of the foolish. And he says this is vanity. As we said, Jesus said, the man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesses. Matthew 6, he says, so is he that layeth up treasures for himself and is not rich toward God. We are admonished to lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven. He said, don't labor for that which is going to pass away. Now, ultimately, he said, well, you build these great monuments, and these people built these great buildings, and they're still standing today. Yeah. When the Lord comes back, they're not going to be standing. It's all going to burn up eventually anyway. That's the bottom line. And that's what he was saying. In compared to eternity, when we compare our lives and the things we do in the overall scheme of the universe and eternity, it's all going to burn up in the end anyway. And so Jesus was trying to take us from what Solomon is saying and take us a step further and say, what we need to do is to labor for that which will have in eternity. Lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven, not on the earth. In other words, the meaning of this life must be rooted in eternity, not under the sun. And so we see in verse 20 through 26, he says he began to despair of his life and accomplishments and all his labor under the sun. He describes here, he says, therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair. You know, when he came to that realization, here I've spent all this, my life, all this time, all this energy, collecting wisdom and knowledge and putting these things into some use and building buildings and doing all these great things and so on. And when I realize it's all going to pass away, I realize I'm going to pass away, and somebody else is going to have control over all of this, and so on. Because, you know what happened? Eventually, down the line, they went into idolatry, and God raised up the Chaldeans who came in, and they destroyed Jerusalem. It was leveled. It was burnt to the ground. So all these things that Solomon had created, where is it? It's gone. It's vain. It was empty. It's gone. And so he said, you know, when I realized that, my heart began to despair. For there's a man whose labor is in wisdom and in knowledge and in equity. Yet to a man that hath not labored therein, that is, in wisdom and knowledge and justice, equity, shall he leave it for his portion. This also is vanity and a great evil. For what hath man of all his labor, and of the vexation of his heart, wherein he hath labored under the sun? You know, what is there? You know, you've labored and done all these things. You endured the vexation and all that goes with it in having these things. He says, what is there in that? For all his days are sorrow, and his travail grief. Yea, his heart taketh no rest in the night. There is this also is vanity. I mean, if you lay up worrying, is somebody going to break through and steal this? You know, you begin to worry over those things. And evidently Solomon lost sleep. What good is it in having if you can't get a good night's sleep? And so he concludes here, beginning with verse 24, there is nothing better man that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw that it was from the hand of God. He had mentioned earlier that this was from God, and that, you know, to enjoy. His labor. And so he says, there's nothing better, that is, the best that you can expect or should expect is to enjoy, find something to do that you enjoy doing, get the enjoyment out of what you're doing, because that's it. He said, for who can eat, or else who hasteneth hereunto more than I? He said, who's done these things more than what I've done? And this is what I've found. So the best you can, I have found that the best I can look for is to have enjoyed the fruits of my labor. Anything more than that is just vanity and vexation of spirit. Said, for God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy. Said, to those that please God, that are good in his sight, not in the sight of man, but good in God's sight. And we understand, and this was true even in the Old Testament, that we're counted good only through faith in the Lord Jesus Christ and his righteousness. Otherwise, he said, there's none good, no, not one. But God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom. He tells, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not. And knowledge and joy. God giveth us joy. And so, especially we see here, life under the sun, life apart from God, and apart from a relationship with God, is truly vain. It's all empty. There's nothing to be had from it. You're going to leave it behind. You're going to die. And it's going to be left behind. And it says, appointed a man wants to die, and after this, the judgment. So if you live your life for yourself, you live your life to accumulate things, to enjoy things, and for the pleasure and these things, and God's not in your life, then it's vain. You're going to die, and you're going to stand before God and give an account. And he said, for God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he giveth travail, to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. In other words, he says to the sinner, you go through all this labor and travail, and then you're going to leave it, And so God says, I'm going to make sure that my people get it. I'm going to give it to those that are good in my sight. All things work together for good in them who love God, who are the called according to his purpose. And so he said, you take all this labor and travail under the sun. Without God, it's vain, it's empty, there's no profit in it. And all those things that you have gathered and you've accumulated, you're going to die and leave behind, and God's going to give it to his people. So this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. And so he kind of puts things into perspective for us. Then we'll take up, Lord willing, next week with chapter 3. But we see here how he puts in perspective the pursuits of life, whatever that might entail. And what are all the things that men look to and pursue to give meaning to their life? See, I think everybody likes to think their life has meaning. There is a purpose. And usually they look for something outside of themselves, something greater than themselves that they can be a part of, that they can point to, and through their labor and giving sacrificially even sometimes to these causes, they feel like I've done something worthwhile. Solomon's pointing out, if it's not done for God's glory, if it's not pleasing to God, if you don't have a relationship with God, and all that you're doing is that which is under the sun in this life, it is vain. And all the vexation and sorrow and grief that you endure to accomplish these things, that it's vain. It's empty and there's no profit in it under the sun. And so as we look around us and we look at people, we look at examples and things, and we look at accomplishments of other people, and sometimes they influence us, and we say, well, I want to be like that. I want to have that kind of a car. I want to have that kind of a home. I want, to do the things that this person is doing. Stop and look at it. We need to seek to do God's will for our life. And because of the fall, because of sin, it is part of the curse that we must labor and earn our bread, our food, by the sweat of our brow. And when we do that, and we understand that, and we work and labor, and we have those things necessary to sustain life, and pretty much we'll see later on, Solomon says, to eat and drink, enjoy the fruit of your labor, and enjoy your wife, that those simple things, he said, that's what God has given us. That is our portion to enjoy under the sun. And then we should labor in such a way for those things which do not pass away. We're to lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven. We are to have that right relationship with God and do those things pleasing to Him. And that makes this life worthwhile and prepares and lays up in store for us those things which we will have through all eternity, which will not be under the sun. As a matter of fact, when you read over the book of Revelation, the new heavens and new earth, there is no sun in eternity, because He's the light of it. Now, they had no need of the sun, for He's the light of it. That is when our life and our labor has meaning. Paul said there in the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians, where he said, if we have hope in Christ in this life only, we're of all men most miserable. But he concludes that chapter with saying, knowing that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. When our labor is in the Lord, it is to please the Lord. We're being obedient to Him and following His leadership, the things that He would have us to do. Man might think that's vain and that's foolish. But Paul says that we know that our labor in the Lord is not in vain. Those pursuits are not vain, and there is not the vexation of spirit. But our joy is in the Lord. He gives us peace, He gives us joy, and He makes our lives mean and amount to something. Let us stand together.